Welcome back to the Beit Midrash, everyone. Glad you're back. Hope everybody had a meaningful and a grateful Thanksgiving and a restful one, and got to spend some time with friends or family or whomever you were celebrating with. So glad you're back. I hope you had safe travels and good travels, and glad to come back and learn together. So we're coming back to God of Becoming in Relationship. We're on chapter 4 today on creation. Margaret, did you have a comment or did you accidentally raise your hand? I think that was an accidentally raised your hand.
No, it was not an accident.
Oh, okay.
I had a question from last week. I just watched yesterday. I watched the recording of last week.
It was 2 weeks ago, so now you're like really stretching the depths of my memory, but I'll see what I can do.
Okay. Okay. Esther asked a question about people who started with Esther asking a question about people who were atheists and so on. And you said that people who were atheists could act, God could impel or push or coerce, no, not coerce, those are all bad words, that could
encourage, yes.
Motivate or encourage atheists to do tzedakah, and that would be a good thing. And the question that occurred to me about that was that if covenant is a two-way street, then how is an atheist in covenant with God?
It's a good question. So here's kind of what, at least the way I'm understanding this and the way I'm thinking about this, is we as people are in covenant with God. Whether we choose to think of ourselves in covenant with God is a different question. So, or take a slightly different example, a person born of a Jewish mother is Jewish, or if they convert, let's keep the birth one because that might work better. Person born of a Jewish mother is Jewish. If they don't observe a single mitzvah, if they don't come to the synagogue, if they don't do anything, they're no less Jewish. They're still Jewish, they're just not practicing the terms of the covenant. I'm kind of thinking of it kind of in that same way, in that atheists can deny that they're in relationship with God because there is no God, but doesn't mean they might not be persuaded to do good things by the still small voice that is within them. That makes sense?
I understand what you're saying, but I do not entirely buy it.
Okay, that's fair. Because, or like, or.
Well, I think that might be a long conversation, and we have other things to talk about today. So, so I'm not gonna do another rabbit hole.
Barbara Brandy.
I'd like to say that in my notes, I don't know who said this, and it may have been you, Rabbi, that one of the special things about an atheist doing a mitzvah, like making or giving tzedakah or something like that, it's extra wonderful because they're doing it for all the right reasons, not because they're just following a ritual. And I think that even though I might still be in Margaret's situation and not understanding a lot about the question, I did like that explanation. And it made me personally feel a lot better because now I know I'm doing things for the right reason, not because I was told to.
Stuart.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I haven't had a chance to bring up this idea, but I think it goes along with a lot of what we're talking about, which is, to me, every consideration is a continuum. You got things way to the one side, way to the left side, and all the way between them. And we haven't stated this, but I think just this whole atheism, whether there is or is not a God, I think of it as a continuum. I might have a little bit of doubt. Other people have a lot of doubt. Other people don't have any doubt. And I think you have to admit it to yourself that if you're not 100% sure, maybe you're 99%, but 100% sure that there is or is not a God, that you can still do mitzvot and you can still practice Judaism with that little doubt in your mind.
Yeah. To that point, Rabbi Ed Feinstein tells a story, and I apologize. You're likely going to hear this story at some point again because story. It's a story of a Hasidic community in Europe who's sitting, and the Rebbe is sitting there, and one of his students comes in and says, Rebbe, there's a great philosopher who is coming to us, and he's requesting a conversation with you. And the Rebbe says, all right, like when he gets here, let me know and we'll talk. And the student says, I don't think you understand, Rabbi. This philosopher is an ardent atheist. He does not believe in God, and he has argued with every philosopher and religious leader in Europe, and he has defeated them all. And, I'm worried. And the Rebbe says, I'm not worried. Let him come. And the student says, are you sure? The Rebbe says, let him come. It'll be fine. So, the philosopher comes and, he's shown to the Rebbe's office. He comes in, he closes the door, and the philosopher says, do you know why I'm here? And the Rebbe says, yes. Says, so, do you want to hear my argument? And the Rebbe says, is it possible? Rebbe, and the philosopher thinks for a minute, he's like, is it possible? He says, is it possible? The philosopher says, anything is possible, right? So, anything is possible. So, that speaks a little bit to that spectrum idea that, there's true believers, there's true non-believers, but, there's a lot of people in the middle who have questions, who have doubts. Is it possible? Anything's possible. So, any opening thoughts, comments on chapter 4 on creation? Yes, Stuart.
Well, looking through the whole chapter, it reminded me of the whole thing about scientists trying to find, like Einstein, trying to find the ultimate theory of the universe. And does that apply to quantum mechanics? In other words, there are physics rules that guide how electrons and, at the molecular level, the atomic level, how things work. And then there are rules of physics, astronomical rules that gauge how different planets go around the sun, etc. They haven't found one scientific explanation that links the two, where you could use the same rules to apply to one and the other. So I'm willing to live in a world of doubt, where we just don't know, but we continue to live our lives. And one day there may be an answer, but maybe there will not be an answer. I don't know.
Yes. You know, what I was before you started talking, I was thinking, I was going to say, what is Rabbi Artson's goal? What is he trying to get at in this chapter? And then as you were talking, I'm like, well, I think there's actually a couple things he's trying to get at in this chapter. So, what are some of those? What are the things he's trying? What are the points he's trying to enforce and trying to make here? Lisa?
Well, one thing that I got out of it was that science doesn't have an exact answer, but science has several answers, and that process theology can coexist with scientific explanations in the way that just the creation story really can't coexist with science.
Good. This is one of Rabbi Artson's big talking points. Is we always think of science and religion as being at war with each other or being against each other, and part of his argument is they're really not, and that our science and science and religion should work together to help us inform and create a better understanding of the world around us. So part of his argument is, science has a couple of different theories of creation and how the world started, none of which are really at odds with the biblical story of creation. It is at odds with the story of God doing creation ex nihilo. My Latin's not great, sorry. God creating the world out of nothing. That science is kind of opposed to, but as he points out, the Bible itself doesn't really seem particularly supportive of that. Like a close reading of the text doesn't really support that there was nothing. And the rabbis, some of the rabbis don't even necessarily agree with that. So we're holding on to something that doesn't seem like it fits logically with what else we know. And so perhaps we should reevaluate our understanding of this world and creation in that light, and that religion should reevaluate its understanding of creation, and we should be ready to continuously keep evaluating it, because it's a process. And we're going to keep learning more, and as we learn more, it'll continue informing us. Anybody else? Yeah, Karen?
Okay, so one of the points that I got was that creation is ongoing and also developmental and also in partnership.
All of which are deeply embedded in Jewish ideas. Mm-hmm. So, every morning we say, Mechadesh b'chol yom tamid maaseh v'reshit, that you're always renewing the acts of creation. We say at the end of that blessing, Yotzer HaMeorot, God who creates, not who created, but who creates the lights. In the evening we say Hamariv Aravim, one who brings about the evening, not who caused one time the evening to come, but every day is causing creation to happen again. So there's a level at which God is constantly renewing creation, and it is a constant process and change and evolution and development, and we have a part in what that looks like by our choices and our actions. Stuart, were you going to say something?
Oh, because I thought that what he's teaching in terms of the theological approach to explaining the universe, that it made me think about the scientifics. I was trying to wonder about, rather than calling this process theology, whether you should call it scientific theology or you should call it theological science or something like that. I mean, to me, they are together. They are melded together, and we don't understand all what that means. But I think I think they're both. There's truth in both of them, and they work together.
Yes. Margaret, you're muted.
I think that one of the things that he is saying is that that we have to live with uncertainty, and that in addition to the constant creation, and that also he brings up what we talked about, you all talked about, and I listened to, the idea of some kind of soul and spiritual life force, even in inorganic things like stones and leaves and water, which I think is an interesting, which I think is an interesting idea.
Barbara Brandy.
In intro geology and planetary geology classes, I ended up talking about the Big Bang for many years. And the question that was unavoidable, it got asked every semester, was, what was there before the Big Bang? And there are two things that I have to say about that. Right now, I'm really pleased with people in this group who are saying, I'm comfortable with not knowing. My students were never comfortable with not knowing. And the best thing that I could say was that the question just didn't make any sense, because at that point, I hadn't focused the way Rabbi Artson does on the fact that you got to listen to verse 2, where it says, start with something void, unknown, etc. And I guess I didn't want to mix religion and science if I had known that and would have said that in my classes. But the college students taking those classes might have related to that really well, because so many of them were fundamentalist Christians and wanted to know what this Jewish lady had to say. But I did end up talking about the fact that some questions don't make any sense. And an example that it's not original to me was that if you start walking toward the North Pole and walking toward the North Pole and you get to the North Pole, can you still walk north? No, you can't. After that, when you hit the North Pole, everything is going south. And so some questions don't make any sense. And my problem was I hadn't read Bereshit closely enough, because as Rabbi Artson talks about, the second verse is really critical.
Yes. Rabbi Albert Lewis, who was a rabbi in New Jersey for many years, has a quote. I don't remember it verbatim, but it's along the lines of, when science gets down to the smallest atom and splits the proton and splits the quark and finds out, what this universe is made of, then what? Right? There's always going to be something else beyond that. And, for Rabbi Lewis, he's like, that's where God comes in, is that there's always something beyond that. I think Rabbi Artson does a good job of pointing out that what was before the Big Bang Theory, or before the Big Bang, sorry, we have no way of possibly knowing that.
Mm-hmm.
We're never going to be able to answer that question. And that's okay. We don't have to answer that question. It's just not a possibility. Barbara Ayland?
Yeah, first I just wanted to say in defense of Barbara's students, I also wasn't comfortable with not knowing when I was in my 20s. So I think it's something that we learn as we age, that you got to get comfortable with it. But then when Rabbi was talking about science and how it's going to get down to a place where it can't answer the questions, you know, the same happens to religion. Because my thing is, okay, everyone's, yay, God exists, so God created the universe. Well, who created God? Like that doesn't, that's why it doesn't help me, because I still have the question of, you're still left with this big thing that there's no answer to. So,
But I think that falls, I think, somewhat into the same category as Barbara's student's question. It's a question that can't be answered.
Yeah.
And we just have to accept that it can't be answered and move on, because philosophers have tried to make that argument for years, for centuries, and it always comes back to, well, like, God is eternal. Well, God didn't need to be created because God is eternal. Well, that's fine, but that doesn't exactly answer the question, and it's because the question can't actually be answered.
it's only a question in rebutting the idea that the reason to believe in God is because it explains everything, because it doesn't. That's all.
Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't going to say that, but I would say this to that, is that I think that's true if you use thought, as your only explanation. Like if you open up like the senses, the whole experience, the whole felt sense of things, then it's more like, for me, it get like I don't have to understand, I don't have to get stuck there. And I don't know if that made sense, but it just like works better.
I think it does pull in a little bit to where Rabbi Artson is going to go, which is, yes, Barbara Brandy and Barbara Ayland are asking logic, thought questions. And if you look at the physical world, there is always going to be questions beyond. I think where Rabbi Artson's trying to go, or will go eventually, is there's not this dichotomy between the body and the spirit, but that they are intimately intertwined with each other, and not two separate beings as we usually think of them. So we can't deny what the spirit already knows, or the experiences we have, or the senses we have, because the spirit and the body are intertwined with each other, not two separate beings.
And what I was going to ask her is this thing where, like with Barbara, when you were saying, if I would have known now what I knew back then when I was teaching these students, it's like, but that was where you were then. It's like this developmental thing. And my question is, sometimes I have trouble, like, if I don't, like, just made a big mess of things, and there's something in the chapter that said, and God said it was good, each stage of creation, like really spiritually, I mean, wrapping myself around everything's good, like this election, or the result, am I making it? Are you getting my question? Like, is there a necessary, and it's good wherever we are? It's all for the best. That's what my son says a lot. It's all for the best. And I don't know if I don't know. Sometimes I'm okay with that, and sometimes I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, the Talmud has this concept of, at some point in the future, everything will be good, and we'll recognize that everything is good. Those who learned Rabbi Nachman with me 2 years ago, give or take, Rabbi Nachman, that's a big part of Rabbi Nachman's philosophy, is everything is good, everything is because God is good, everything is good, and anything that God causes to happen must be good, and anything that's bad is just because you can't recognize that it's good. That's, on some level, that's a nice personal way to live if you can manage it. It's not really exactly philosophically sound. It runs into some big problems. That makes it hard to say that for everyone.
That's what I'm finding. That right. But I don't know that I know what those philosophical problems are yet. Maybe I'll learn them.
Well,
But it doesn't matter if we go there, but
I mean, I think you do know what they are. It's, why do infants get cancer and die? How do you tell parents, oh, it's okay, that's a good thing?
right.
How do you say, with the memorial service we have tomorrow, somebody who did so much good in this world and gave so much of herself and falls and breaks her spine, how can you tell her it's okay, that's a good thing that happened to you?
Right.
That's where the philosophical problem lies. If you personally want to live by it, gazé gesundheit, hey, I'm not going to stop you. But as a philosophical premise, it's flawed.
Yeah.
Cindy, you were going to say something after you unmute.
So, yeah, so I can't live with that everything for the best thing. That, I mean, you press my button, Karen. However, I did like what you said about accepting everything that comes along in the process. Because if we are in the process of creating every single day and in every single moment, even if the steps in the process are I don't want to say flawed, but if we're not there yet, if there is learning and growth in that moment, it informs the process. So not seeing the mistake as the end point, but seeing it as a stepping stone, in the process. I mean, we joke in our family, when over little things, not big things, trust me. And we, when we finally get to a point, we joke, trust the process. But in truth, that is really helpful. So I like what you said, and I'm going to use that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a story in the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, and I'm trying to remember the whole thing, but he's riding into a town and he stops for the night. And, while he's sleeping, his horse runs off into the wilderness, and, he wakes up, finds out the horse isn't there. He goes, well, this too is for the good. And, a little while later, a wolf comes and eats his chicken that he had with him, and he says, this too is for the good. And, soon after, wind blows and blows out his lamp and his fire, and he says, this too is for the good. And then, when he wakes up in the morning, he finds out there was an enemy army that was marching by. And, if his horse had sensed it, or the chicken had called out in the morning, or if they had seen his lamp, he probably would have died. Now, are these all necessarily good things? No. But I think a little bit to what Cindy was saying, he trusted the process. He said, my horse running away stinks. My chicken getting killed stinks. My candle blowing out stinks. These things are awful. I get that. But I'm going to trust the process that, something else is going to happen after that. I think, I have some issues with that story generally for the same kind of philosophical reasons we were discussing, not least of which is wasn't good for the chicken. But, there is something of trusting the process and hoping that things will turn out okay, even when things are not okay. Yes, Esther.
Well, I mean, it seems to me this is fundamentally why he wrote this book, to address the issue of bad things happening to good people, or bad things happening. And to me, it's not trust the process. It's our only choice. If you deny the process, then you can't figure out what to do with it. I mean, part of the process, part of the continuing creation, and really this is all therapy. A lot of this seems to me sort of a justification for religion, and trying to fit. Maybe therapy is religion and religion is therapy, but they seem very close to me in the sense that trusting the process means that you have to face reality and deal with the reality, good, bad, or otherwise, and hope. And maybe this is where faith comes in, that ultimately, if you approach things in reality and do the best you can at the moment, that there will be a way beyond this moment.
Beautifully said. That's it for
Amen. Amen.
I can't tell if that was Barbara or Stuart that was raising their hand.
That's Stuart's hand.
That's Stuart's hand. Okay, I couldn't. It was right between you. I couldn't quite tell.
I wanted to get into the weeds a little bit. I mean, he is trying to explain creation. He uses the two options. One, the Big Bang Theory, which I think the scientific world understands a lot of. But then there's I'd like you to explain the eternal inflation concept of these space-time bubbles. And it sounds to me like he's trying to understand what the situation, as many people have said, are there infinite universes? And is each in a space-time bubble, whatever that is? And but to me, maybe each of these space-time bubbles is the world that is explained by quantum theory, by these small little entities that are sitting there for some reason. What we haven't explained is, why did the Big Bang occur? No, I haven't anybody giving me an explanation of why did it occur. And so are there virtual infinite space-time bubbles out there which are sitting there and kind of percolating, and then whatever we don't understand, whatever the explanation for the Big Bang, it happens to some of these bubbles pop, and then another universe is created. So explain what an eternal inflation space-time bubble is.
I mean, I was mildly afraid somebody would ask for more details on this, because I'm not sure I 100% followed it, but I'll try. So just imagine for a moment a infinite, or he calls it a sea. So let's go with an infinite sea that is just kind of floating out there. Within that sea, every choice we make branches off into what he calls a new bubble. So, so in theory, I came here, I showed up, I turned on the Zoom, I agreed to teach this class. That opened up one space-time bubble. If I had not, then another, like my choice to not created a different space-time bubble, and the world would have, like that universe would have been different based on that bubble. And so every choice we make opens like two possible bubbles or three bubbles or however many options we have that of what the world, the universe could have looked like if we had done things differently. Any Marvel fans here? Couple. So Marvel has has been exploring this somewhat. If you watch on Disney Plus, they have a show called What If? And the whole premise of the show is how would things have been different if this one thing would have been different? And how is the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe different because of this one choice somebody made along the line? You like the show, you don't like the show. I think there was one about zombies. That was a weird one. But, what if all the Avengers turned into zombies? That was an odd episode. But, the world, part of the premise of this, I think, idea is that the world we live in is a product of every choice that everybody has ever made, but that there are infinite possible worlds out there based on any number of different choices that everybody else had made. So, on a macro scale, God, the Big Bang happened in this particular way. But if the universe was created in a different way, that would be a completely different space-time bubble and branch off of what the world could have looked like. Does that kind of, sort of, possibly make sense?
Anything's
Yes.
possible.
Huh? Anything's possible, yes. Esther?
This isn't a question really, but it's what comes to mind when you talk about that. And in some ways, to me, it makes God and the power of God, and I think I've brought this up before, very small, very, very teeny. And when I think about it in today's world, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening, in so many places in the world where there's so much murder and destruction and hatred and evil, and that and yet a lot of it is due to the beliefs in God and beliefs in religion, and yet the power of God, when you think about infinite worlds that we all impact, is so small. This is so troubling and upsetting to me, actually. I'll leave it at that.
So, it's interesting also. Yes, I think people, I probably mentioned this before too, that a lot of, I think, the issue people have with religion is because religion is so often used as a weapon rather than a salve. It's used to force your beliefs on others rather than to create greater love between people and bring people together. That is a problem of bad religion, no doubt. And I don't mean the 90s rock band, just for the record. But I did listen to a couple of their songs at one point in my life. But there's also a level at which, partially because of the bad religion and partially because of people's turning away for any number of reasons, not some of it is because they don't like the religion they were brought up with, or some of it is because um, you know, they had an experience that caused them to abandon religion. But there's a lot of people, there's a growing number of people who are abandoning religion altogether, and I'm not fully convinced that the correlation is not have some parallel between everything we're seeing and people's secularization of life and abandonment of religion.
And to me, it seems the opposite. It seems almost the opposite, that people who do not believe in religion, who do not believe in the power of God or a God to determine something, that those are the peaceniks, or those are the people who live and let live. Those are the people who, so much of what goes on in the world seems to be, and over the course of the world, is from people who are strong believers in the right way.
So, Rabbi David Wolpe makes an argument against that and says, historically speaking, that's just not accurate. You look at those who have rejected religion, communism, Nazism, and they have created far more destruction than like those two alone have created far more destruction than religion has on its own. So, and he has another argument that, in the absence of God, people elevate themselves to God. And they see themselves as the ultimate power, or they see a leader who has the ultimate power, and they stop and they worship the leader, and anything that contradicts the leader, they reject. I think there's a fair amount of that going on in the world as well. Barbara Ayland?
Well, I was just going to say about a big loss when we lose religion is the loss of community, which can certainly be filled other ways besides religion, but doesn't seem to have been. So I think, to me, it's really the loss of community that's causing a lot of our problems. And of course, communities can cause problems too. Like we don't have a fail-safe way of being the best we can be. We definitely do not. But I do think the loss of community and the loneliness has caused a lot of violence and bad things.
Agreed. If you ever have a chance to listen to Rabbi Mark Borovitz or read his stuff, he's a fascinating guy.
Mark who?
Borovitz, Borovitz. Or you can read up on his wife, Harriet Rossetto, though I think Mark does more of the writing than she does. He, in short, I won't go into his whole backstory, but he has created the first Jewish residential addiction treatment center in Los Angeles called Beit Tshuva. And a big part of his approach is very much what Barbara just said, is that what you see in addiction is a lot of people who just feel ungrounded, who feel kind of lost and don't have a community or anything to hold on to. And so he created this to create community in a Jewish way. He accepts non-Jews too. They just have to agree to live under the rules of Beit Tshuva. And he runs a 12-step program there. And he'll say, depression is partially a loss of faith, And addiction and depression is an addiction, is one of his, one of the things that I thought about. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way to think about it. That depression is addiction in some way. That you start telling yourself one bad message, and then at some point that bad message isn't resonating enough, so you tell yourself a worse message and a worse message until you kind of go down the hole. But he argues that it's largely a spiritual problem rather than a physical problem. And I agree with some of that. I don't agree with all of it, which brings me to one of the last points I wanted to make sure I made, is towards the end of the chapter on 28 and 29. In undergraduate, I took an abnormal psychology course. A large part of the course was dedicated to, is this a disorder environmentally based or genetically based? And literally every single time it's a bit of both. Even disorders that have a strong genetic component are not 100% genetically, just because you have the gene doesn't mean you're going to have the disorder. There's still an environmental part around it. And it's not either or, I think was kind of my lesson, my takeaway from that, is that life is not either or. It's never just one thing or another, but that there's a balance between the two. And so eternal inflation, Big Bang Theory, it might not be one or the other. It could be both for all we know. But that we shouldn't limit our understandings to, it has to be this or that. And I think part of what process theology tries to argue is it's very rarely ever this or that, but that it's a little bit of both. And how do you start living in a way that you're never thinking one thing or the other, but can live in between in the process. Yes, Barbara. Brandy.
In the same paragraph that you're looking at, the last paragraph on 28 and 29, is my favorite sentence about process theology, where he says, process theology saves us from having to weigh in beyond what we can know. And that helps a lot in thinking about what is the reason for having developed process theology. Because earlier, when we've started the book, I'm thinking, yeah, Artson and the others are using this idea of process theology to sort of tread a line between this and that. But the idea that it makes it easy, or it facilitates not worrying about what you don't know, because things are going to change. So that was my favorite paragraph, probably, or favorite sentence, probably so far in the whole book. Maybe there will be others.
God willing. Any other closing comments, thoughts, questions?
Well, I think that should be underlined, Barbara, because, and I said this sort of off the cuff earlier, but I think it's very difficult to actually live with uncertainty. I think people really want to have everything nailed down. It's the Big Bang Theory. It's our DNA made, my DNA made me do it. all that kind of stuff. It's really it's hard to live with uncertainty, and that's one of the things that that this process theology is asking one to do and supporting one in doing. Just underline the fact that that really is a psychologically difficult thing to do, that we're just not naturally built or educated perhaps for doing.
Maybe it should
Are we
actually
built or are we
say-
educated? That's a but yes, that's
maybe
kind
it
of
should say we don't have to weigh in today on what we don't know, because I do believe that every bit of work that's done can add to what we already know. I mean, I'm a seismologist. I worry about when are we going to be able to predict earthquakes and save everybody. But there's so much you have to know in order to be able to predict something like that, that you're just inching along for the past centuries and centuries of being bothered by earthquakes. So medicine's the same thing. We know a lot more than we did when, when it started, or when people started doing things. So this says, don't worry about what you don't know. It's okay.
yeah, and I think that is part of what Rabbi Artson's arguing too, is we only know what we know now, and we can only make decisions based on what we know at this moment in time. But part of process is that we're constantly changing and evolving, and as we learn more information, we'll change what we do based on the information we have at that moment. And we should embrace those changes that we learn in process and not reject them because they contradict what we believe.
But I understand Margaret's professional perspective that is very difficult to do unless you're motivated in that direction.
It is hard for people to do. It doesn't come naturally to people. Certainty, knowing for sure, that's a lot easier. But uncertainty.
But look how what came to me when Barbara was talking about science is, but it's also a good thing that people want to know, because otherwise we would not be propelled forward to learn the more. So we really do need both. We need to accept what we don't know right now, but we also, at least some people, need to be propelled to learn more. So
he doesn't say accept what we don't know. He says, don't worry about it. I cannot be bothered by something. And, that's not the same thing as accepting it.
I don't think he says we shouldn't be bothered by it. I think being bothered by it is what motivates scientific discovery in the first place. But, you don't have to get hung up on and not be able to live your life because you don't know something. You be open to what you don't know and learn from there. Yes, Cindy.
I think it requires the willingness to let go of the what ifs, to live more with, okay, this is what I do know, this is what I can do, and with that knowledge, how can I move forward, rather than getting bogged down in the what ifs, because we're not going to be able to predict what the future is. We can only deal with the information that we have. And for me, it's also the ability challenging myself to let go of the need to control everything. And if I can let go of that, the word is holding on. If I could loosen my grip a little bit and just be aware of what I have, what I can do, and what I know in this present moment, I think that's the challenge maybe that Dr. Artson is talking about.
Yes, I think that is part of the challenge, as well as understanding that your choice that you make with that limited knowledge that you have at that moment does have an effect on the larger world. Like, it is an act of creation when you do it, which is, not to pressure the choice, but to embrace the opportunity to help make the world better by the choices you make.
Mhm.
Lisa.
That's the God.
So I was going to say, I'm going to be very short because we're at the end, but I'm one of those strange people that I find living in the gray area is very comforting to me. It's like where I live, and I have a hard time with people who are like, this is this and this is this. When I'm in the gray area, like, I'm constantly curious and seeking new information. And that's kind of where I like to be.
Can be a good place if you learn how to live in it. All right, kol hakavod, everyone. Thank you for learning together. We'll go ahead and wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Don't forget, we have our musical service tomorrow night, 5:15 Oneg, and then service at 5:45. So I hope you'll come sing with us. If I don't see you before then, Shabbat Shalom, and we'll learn again together, God willing, next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Yasher
Thanks,
Koach to
everybody.
everybody.
Cindy, can I ask you a quick question when everybody's excused? I just want to ask Barbara a quick question. I think that on